This is Fox 25 Morning News.
All right, Shannon, thank you. It's Halloween season, and that's a lot of fun for many kids, and for many, it's sort of a scary time. What's appropriate age for Halloween fun, and can being scared actually affect your children as they continue to grow? Joining us this morning is Dr. Srini Pillai. He's the author of Life Unlocked, 7 Revolutionary Lessons to Overcoming Fear. And Dr. Pillai is also the featured cover story in the Boston Parent magazine this month. He's talking about children's fear. Great to see you.
You too. Thanks so much.
You could come in. You know, this is a great time of year for kids, and they have a lot of fun, but you really have to take age into account when you're planning activities, don't you?
I think you do, because, you know, children have a wide range of fears that differ across the lifespan of a child. So, you know, even from 6 months, children can have sort of stranger anxiety. It usually comes in between 10 and 12 months, and then you can have separation anxiety between 10 and 14 months. You know, when we're talking about ghosts, usually those kinds of fears come on around the ages of 4 to 6 years.
Yeah.
And then, you know, later on, sort of 10 to 12 years, it's more about fears around personal well-being and personal safety and whether they're going to be burglars in the house. So I think it's important to recognize that there are normal fears across the lifespan of a child, and learning how to deal with those fears early on can really have a bearing on what happens later on in life.
So do you deal with those fears by keeping them away from those issues, or do you sit down and talk to them about it?
I think probably the most important thing to remember when it comes to childhood fears is to validate the fear. Because I think a lot of times parents want to ignore it or minimize it, and that ends up shaming the child, because for the child that's a very valid experience.
Sure.
So I think validating the fear is really important, sitting down with the child, explaining to the child sort of, you know, what the reality of the situation is, or explaining that if the child is afraid, that the child will be protected by the parents or by other siblings as well.
Okay, let's bring us back to this whole issue of Halloween. And I know my children are getting older now, but my little one, she was always afraid to go out, like for the trick-or-treating and all that kind of thing, because she thought for sure that something was going to jump out at her. We sat and talked about it, and a couple of years she actually didn't go out trick-or-treating. Was that the right answer? I mean, even after having talked to her about it, or should we have taken her out there anyway?
No, I think it's important to be able to talk to your children about it, and I think being out there is probably better than not being out there. And I'll tell you why. Even from a biological perspective, a study that was done recently showed that people who were behaviorally inhibited at the age of 2 showed a greater activation of the fear center of the brain as adults to fearful things. So fear can actually, fearful experiences as a child can actually affect what's going on in your brain as an adult. I think in that particular case, going into the meaning of monsters might have been an important way to handle that. So part of it is sort of asking her, you know, what exactly are you afraid of? And you know, in this month's Boston's Parents paper, another one of the contributors made a great suggestion. It actually suggested that one of the things you can do is, aside from reassuring the child that the monsters will be taken care of and that no monster can really enter this house because this house is wired to make sure that monsters don't come in, you can also put a little tube or can of monster spray at the child's bedside. And, you know, and then using that spray, you can say, you know what, if there's ever a monster, you've got your monster spray, and that can actually take care of the monster.
That does away with monsters every single time.
Completely.
At what point, you know, we're making light, and this is probably the average child who has these kinds of issues, but at what point do you recognize that maybe a child needs some professional help, that they've got an issue that they can't overcome?
Well, I think there are a couple things to consider. I think in general, when we think about sort of the boundary between what's normal and when somebody actually needs professional help, we think in adults, we think about social and occupational functioning. In children, that's not that relevant. But what is relevant, what that translates into, is when the fears get in the way of the child being a child. So if the child is not playing as often, if you find that the child's appetite's affected, if you find that the child doesn't want to go to school or doesn't want to be outside, you know, as soon as you start to feel that the behavior of the child, being a child, is being affected, I think it's useful to try to seek professional help.
And can a professional take care of this in such a way that there's not a backlash the rest of a child's life?
Absolutely. You know, as a child, what you're doing is you're laying down habit circuits in the brain, and these habit circuits become the memory magnets that become the magnets later on in life, so that these are the habits that you turn to. So you know, if you start, because a child's brain can change so much and has what we call neuroplasticity, if a professional works with a child early on in life, he can actually change the way in which brain pathways are being formed.
Well, I think it's important because you certainly don't want a child to be affected by fear all of their life. I can't imagine anything worse as an adult.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
No.
fear holds us back, doesn't it?
It really does, both consciously and unconsciously. And I think to the extent that we can address this early on in life, it will really put a child in a good position later on in life to be able to deal with realistic challenges related to fear.
Sure. Doctor, you have a website, and let's tell everybody it's SeriniPillay.com, and I think we have it across the screen there because I want to make sure you spell it correctly. It's SeriniPillay.com. Nice to see you like always.
Yeah, you too. Thank you very much for having me.
You bet. All right, let's take a break, everybody. We'll be right back.